Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this SSM ICRP joint webinar. I'm Mikael Knochenhauer, and I am the Acting Director General at SSM, the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority. So I'm actually in Stockholm right now. Our authority and Sweden as a nation, we have a very long tradition of active involvement in radiation protection, and also quite a proud tradition with Rolf Sievert, Swedish medical physicist, as one of the pioneers in the field. And he was also one of the founders of ICRP in 1928 and appointed its first chair. Over the years, we as an authority have been involved in many different radiation protection organizations and communities, but the ICRP has always remained particularly close to our hearts, both because of its history, but also because of its unique position in the global radiation protection regime. When we started discussions first about this webinar to be jointly organized by ICRP and SSM, we thought it interesting to explore a more general theme, the role of ICRP in relation to other organizations. And we were pleased to that ICRP accommodated this idea. And I would like to take the opportunity of thanking ICRP very much, both for the possibility to host this joint webinar and for the constructive discussions that have led up to this actual time and during the planning. We believe that today's topic, which is the role of ICRP and stakeholders in the future of radiation protection, we believe it to be very much in line with ICRP's proactive change of direction in recent years, where the organization has strived towards increasing transparency and an increasing involvement of its various stakeholders. Among other things, this has been expressed through an active and open communication on the revision of the general recommendations published as ICRP publication 103. SSM is looking forward to interesting discussions about the future role of ICRP, in particular in connection with the roles of the other stakeholders in the field. And to highlight this, we have invited speakers from 3 types of organizations, 3 types of stakeholders, who will give their perspective on ICRP's future role. I'll introduce them with some more words later on, but in short, they are Christophe Badi, a biologist with significant experience from radiation research, Marina Di Giorgio from the Nuclear Regulatory Authority in Argentina, representing FORO, the Ibero-American Forum of Radiological and Nuclear Regulatory agencies, and Sameh Melhem, who comes from the WNA, the World Nuclear Association, and thus brings us the voice of the nuclear operators. The last part of this webinar will be a panel discussion with Carl Magnus Larsson as the moderator. And here, in addition to the aforementioned speakers, the ICRP chair, Werner Rühm, will also participate, as well as Anna Clark from the IAEA. Some practical details of the webinar. So please note that only the invited speakers and the panel will be allowed to speak. All others are muted. However, we strongly encourage you in the audience to use the chat room to pose questions to the speakers and or to the panel. And time allowing, we will do our best to answer as many as possible of them. For your information, SSM will provide ICRP with a written summary at the end of the webinar, and this will later also be shared through the ICRP website. So with this information, it's time to begin, and I'm happy to introduce Carl Magnus Larsson, who has kindly offered to introduce us to where ICRP is at present, and in this way also to set the scene for this webinar. Carl Magnus has a long background. It started off with a degree in chemistry and biology from the Stockholm University. He has served in different management positions at the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority, but also previously at the Swedish Radiation Protection Institute. And he has lately, for 12 years, 2010 to 2022, been the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA. He has been a member of IAEA's Commission on Safety Standard. He was the chair of UNSCEAR from 2002 to 2005, and he served 3 consecutive terms on the ICRP main commission. Currently, he is a special advisor to the Norwegian Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority, DSA. So please, Carl Magnus, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction, Michael, and good day, everyone, whether it's in the morning or in the evening or in the middle of the day, and from Norway, where I currently am. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction around how we came to where we are now. So starting with the story from the beginning of the ICRP to where we are now. And then, of course, the rest of this webinar is going to be more focused on the future, and in particular, the role of ICRP among other stakeholders in radiation protection and more broadly radiation safety. So Charlotte, who is in Ottawa, the ICRP Secretariat, is going to operate the slide for me. So Charlotte, if you can just hit the button and we go to the first slide. So Michael already gave you the basic information about this webinar, the outline for it. So what I'm trying to do now is to set the scene, the evolving role of ICRP. Then we go to presentations that have more to do with the ICRP's future role. And we are going to focus, as Michael was already mentioning, on 3 different perspectives: the scientific perspective, which Christophe Badi is going to talk to. And we will then have a description of the regulator's perspective, Marina De Giorgio, and the operator or user perspective, Sameh Melhem. That will be followed by a panel discussion and also questions and answers, and all the presenters, Christophe, Marina, Sameh, will be present in that panel. But we will also have 2 other panelists, Anna Clark and Werner Ryn, as was already indicated, and I am going to do my best to moderate this panel discussion. We will then go to the closing. I will try to summarize some of the main element from the panel discussion, and then hand back over to Michael for the, let's say, official closing of the webinar. If you hit the button again, Charlotte, you will see a little further information. And just remember that this webinar is really focusing on the role of ICRP going into the future, not necessarily on radiological protection principles or theory, policy, practice, etc., unless it's directly related to the role of ICRP. So it's really the role of ICRP going into the future. We will know soon a little bit about the history of ICRP, but for the discussion and for the general theme of the theory of the webinar is really the role of ICRP. Now, go back to the beginning then. It actually started here, more or less. This was during the Second International Congress on Radiology in Stockholm. And this is a very well-known and still existing and a landmark restaurant in Stockholm, Hasselbacken. And if you hit the button again, Charlotte, you will see the interior from the time. So to the left, you've got the restaurant, what it looks like now. This is what it looked like during the Second International Congress on Radiology, which was held in Stockholm in 1928, and which was really the birthplace and the year of birth for ICRP. And if you hit the button again, Michael mentioned Rolf Sievert and the legacy of Rolf Sievert, who is, which is of course very prominent still in Sweden. If you have a microscope, you would see the Rolf Sievert actually sitting there at the middle of the table as the chair of the Second International Congress on Radiology. And if you had a magnifying glass, you would see that he doesn't look terribly excited. I guess it was a little bit daunting at the age of about 30 to all of a sudden be thrown into headfirst into this chairing this international congress, and then he became also the first chairman of the ICRP. And go to the next slide. So it started really then with the first publication. It was not called a publication at that time, and ICRP was not called ICRP either. It was really at that point in time focusing on X-ray and radium protection. But the first publication was really about the protection of workers that are in one way or the other involved in practices that have to do with radium or X-ray, and quite forward-looking actually. If you read there, you shouldn't be working for more than 7 hours a day, and you should only be working for 5 days a week, and so on. So it was a good early advice that were provided by the ICRP on worker protection. Now, we are now from publication 1, we are now down to publication 153, and it's counting. So there will be many more publications coming out. And if you look at the history of those publications, and you press the button again, Charlotte, then you can see that what I try to illustrate here is that the focus of the work of ICRP has broadened. It has broadened since 1928, and this is very much in common with many other areas where we talk about health and safety. Started with worker safety, with the realization about the stochastic effects and so on. It also included public protection of the public and including patients. And it has subsequently expanded further to include also environment, including veterinary practices, protection of resources, and so on. And it's actually an evolution that is very similar to the evolution in many other fields. If you go to mining industry or the use of hazardous chemicals and so on, the focus started always with the workers, and it expanded to the public, and then as a third element we went to the environment. So it's a similar evolution over the years since 1928 for almost 100 years now. Next slide, please. A little bit then about the about ICRP as an organization, and I think that one thing that cannot be emphasized enough is really the identity or the soul of the organization, if you like. We have to remember that unlike many other organizations, this is a charity. It's a charitable incorporated organization, as it's called, which is registered with the Charity Commission of England and Wales, and that is all in the statutes. That is the way that it has to be. But it is a charity. It's not coupled to any particular organization. It's not coupled to advocate any other interests than the interest of the public. And all of this is laid out in the ethical framework of ICRP, which talks about its committed to public benefits. It's independent on any state or organization. It's impartial. It's transparent, and if you are transparent, you will also be held accountable by various parties that you actually live up and deliver what you have said that you deliver, and that you are committed to public benefit, independent, impartial, and transparent. So all of that is in the Code of Ethics. Go to the next slide. If you go to the strategic directions, which is a document that covers 2020 to 2024, it reiterates the purpose of ICRP. The ICRP is an organization that develops the system for radiological protection for the public benefit. And this system takes into account science, ethical values, practical experience, and it is the basis of really the regulatory framework and the legal framework in many, many countries through implementation through other mechanisms that I will mention in a second. And the objective of the system is to contribute to an appropriate level of protection for people and the environment against the harmful effects of radiation, but importantly, not by unduly limiting the individual or societal benefits of activities involving radiation. So this is really the soul and the purpose of ICRP. So if you go to the next one. Yes, implementation, I was mentioning that. And we usually talk about the line that you can draw from basic science to applied science to recommendations and then to standards. And if you press again, the way it has traditionally been described, and this was possibly true at one point in time, the science was something that was within the mandate of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, or UNSCE. The science was being digested and reformulated by ICRP into recommendations, and then these recommendations would find their way into, for instance, the IAEA safety standards. If you press the button again, you will probably see something which is much more true, that this actually the information flow goes in all directions, and usually in all directions at the same time. It's difficult to have a system, and it would be very problematic to have a system where you went from science to recommendations to implementations in the way that I described before. That would just take an awful lot of time. However, of course, neither UNSCE nor IAEA existed at the time when ICRP started its work, and there has been since then an enormous growth in different organizations. And if you go to the next slide, this is one that I don't even will try to explain, but you will just see the map here of different organizations and groups that are involved in radiation protection or in radiation safety, one way or the other. And there is a huge amount of interaction between them in a very complex and perhaps one can also say sometimes a little bit of a fragmented way. But this is the reality, and this is the world that we are living in now. And because of that also ICRP has evolved and ICRP has changed. If you go to the next slide. That has required, and in particular, I would say during the last 15 to 20 years, there has been an enormous growth in the way that ICRP has started its outreach activities and started to engage with not only other organizations, but also with people in general, and with the scientific community, with other stakeholders, and through numerous ways. In the old days, it might have been a little bit more of an expert body and not having a lot of interaction outside the organization itself, but that has increased through consultation around the publications, consultation around what is necessary for the next generation of general recommendations. And as was pointed out before, they are now open for review. Whether that's going to lead to major revision is something that we will know in a few years' time. The publications that were previously you had to buy, they are now almost free. That means that most of them are actually free and can be downloaded by just anyone who has use for those publications. Open call for nominations to the different task groups and to the different committees. ICRP has entered into formal relationships or liaison arrangements with a variety of organizations, many of them that I showed you on the slide before. Started a series of symposia every second year, and there have been symposia every second year, except the one that we had last year, which was not every second year because of COVID, but we are getting back on track on that with the symposium in November, which is going to be in Tokyo, Japan. And they have been very well attended and very interesting, and I think the go-to place if you want to discuss the system, the international system for radiological protection. There have been publications and invited comments on research needs. There's the call for action from the last symposium in Vancouver, and also some more easily digested general information for anyone really who wants to work about, who wants to know about radiation, the radiation effects, radiation protection, different types and uses of radiation. You can go to ICRpedia, which is that easily digested source of information on the ICRP website. And if you click the button again, all of that you can find on the ICRP website, which has also undergone major transformation in recent years, and is a very useful source of information for anyone who is interested in either what ICRP is doing now or in the history of ICRP. But let's go to the last slide. That is how we got to the point where we are now. And the main theme of this webinar is, of course, the future of ICRP, and in particular the role of ICRP and stakeholders in the future of radiological protections. So we will go now to the presentations, the three presentations, and then we will have the moderated discussions, and then we will try to summarize this in some sort of conclusions. And there should also be a short conclusion document that will eventually be published on the ICRP website. So that's really all from me. So I would like to hand back now to Michael for the introduction of the first speaker, or the first real speaker. This was just an introduction. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Carl Magnus, for this excellent introduction, really setting the scene for our webinar. And yes, now let's go with the stakeholders. The first one giving the scientific perspective is Christophe Badi. Christophe has a PhD in radiobiology from the Paris-Sud University. Since 2005, he has worked at radiation, chemical and environmental hazards of the UK HSA Health Security Agency, and where he is the head of Department of Radiation Effects since 2023. That's quite recent. Congratulations. He is involved in radiation research in Europe and in member of several scientific committees. Christophe is a member of the IRSN Research Orientation Committee. He's also a member of the Scientific Committee of the ASN and a member of the ICRP-C1 committee. So welcome, Christophe, and please give your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
We do.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So yeah, good morning or good afternoon all. I would like to start saying that my presentation today has been prepared with my colleague Liz Ensbury, my sort of head of the radiation effect department, and we both work on this slide to prepare it. So I'll start with my next slide. Yes. I would like to make it clear from the beginning that we would be commenting from our personal perspective, and we thought it would be appropriate to have a few first slide introducing UK HSA, because it's a new organization. We have changed name several times, still being the radiation effect department, but I think it probably would be nice to set the scene for what we're doing. So our mission is to reduce harm for infectious disease and other health security hazard, and our vision is to secure health and prosperity through science. And obviously, we should focus on ionizing radiation in the department, and then what we do is to provide public health expertise to support delivery of radiological and nuclear planning and response work. And also in practice, what we do is to offer a full range of research, development, service, advice, and guidance related to safe use of ionizing radiation in society. So a little bit about our department, and the key work of the radiation effect department is research, which is carried out both independently and collaboration with universities, institutes, both in the United Kingdom and around the world. Our funding comes mainly from the UK government, Department of Health, and also EU grants. So the key function, conduct and publish experimental research on the effect of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, conduct and public epidemiological analysis of radiation risk, provide a source of expert knowledge on the risk and biological effect of radiation, and that's to facilitate the development of appropriate radiation protection standard and advice, and that's done in partnership with government, international body, and others. So last one is also and that's become quite important with recent event worldwide. I think that this is been asked to be a bit more ready and to be able to have the number of people with relevant experience and knowledge for the provision of support to emergency response activities, in particular through a biological dosimetry service. So very briefly, just some example in terms of radiation and cancer. And we have been focusing on elucidating the mechanism of radiation-induced cancer with a specific focus on radiation-induced leukemia. We're also interested in non-cancer disease, and here with a focus on cataract, but also cardiovascular disease, where mechanisms are not well understood. But some of the work done recently has contributed to revise safety standard to protect the lens of the eye. And also in terms of radiation epidemiology, with long-term population study, which are undertaken to uncover association between low-dose radiation exposure and disease. So we actually mostly in the department, and not only in the RCE center. We have 5 members on ICRP committees, committees 1, 3, and 4, and also many others of our colleagues who are observers or task group members. And our deputy director for radiation, Simon Buffler, is a UK representative for UNSCIR. And also we and others contribute to research and development of the system in a variety of additional activities with IAEA, WHO, and CRP. Okay, so now touching on the point which we sort of were asked to think about for this particular webinar, and the role of the scientist in ICRP. And I think this might be relatively obvious in a way, but in terms of science, because that's what I'm supposed to focus on, really, science is fundamental to ICRP, and the ethical basis can only be sustained where there is sound science underpinning recommendation. Then the scientific majority of those contributing to ICRP works are trained scientists selected to contribute to ICRP as scientists using their knowledge and expertise in task group report development and to help to develop the system, the radiation protection system. So in terms of relationship between ICRP and the scientific sector, well, again, scientific understanding is and must remain the basis for the system. ICRP is now clearly committed to openness and stakeholder involvement. And there was a launch last year of the review of the system and the Vancouver call of action. Practical implementation, workshop, information session early in task group development and toward the end. So there's open consultation, presentation at conference, surveys, and really this, just to make the point, the international scientific community should take ICRP up on this. So in terms of relationship between ICRP and the scientific sector, so we've been asked to touch on influence and cooperation, and what we thought what ICRP depend upon the pool of scientific expertise. And again, these I mentioned below in dark and black, that members are distinguished scientists known all over the world in their field, with additional focus on radiological protection. So these scientists in the various sub-disciplines of radiation protection are there to drive its work, and then the number of scientific organizations are special liaison organizations, and these organizations are committed to support the work of ICRP and provide views on topics as they develop. Just to touch on integrity, and I think Carl Magnus mentioned it. ICRP is an independent charity, a non-governmental organization, and that's slightly different from UNSCI and IAEA and others. So I think that's important to have it in mind. And also ICRP has a code of ethics, and I believe this is under revision, and is committed to openness and transparency in its works and operation. So, how should ICRP benefit from scientific results on radiation protection? So, ICRP, of course, draws from the global community of experts who bring a wealth of knowledge to the organization, and it reviews literature and solicits input through consultation on document. And I think also important is the mentorship program, which aims to build the global community of radiation protection scientific expertise. And I will have a slide. Next slide is on it, but it give you some more information. It coordinates in some project with the UNSCI, so the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effect of Atomic Radiation. And quite often documents from UNSCI are the basis for ICRP work. And ICRP recognizes the benefit of having a broad scientific consensus on which to base its conclusion and judgment. So, yeah, in terms of cooperation between ICRP and UNSCI, I think obviously it's very important. UNSCI reviews the scientific basis, and ICRP translates this into radiological protection recommendation. Synergies are important. And we all know resources are limited worldwide, so the work should not be doubled, and ICRP and UNSCI should complement each other. And there is an example here of collaboration between both, and that's on the evaluation of disease of the circulatory system from radiation exposure, and then the ICRP task group, the 119. which deal on this, and is working with UNSCIR, and they have a sort of informal coordination group. Also important to mention that sometimes there are different views of UNSCIR and ICRP, so sort of demonstrating independence as well. That's the case for REDN. And I wanted to touch on obviously something everybody knows about, which is the shape of the dose response for cancer. And we know there's a clear evidence of cancer at absorbed dose above 100 millisievert, and we assume a linear no threshold dose response even for lower doses below 100 milligray, and for dose rate low dose rate below 5 milligray per hour. So there's a lot of experimental studies, but what we have found on ICRP is still believing in it, that there's no alternative dose response relationship, and that is the best and the most prudent one for radiation protection purposes. But what is important to keep in mind that in low dose studies, some scientific data reported are relatively weak, sometimes controversial, or simply difficult to interpret in the context of radiation protection. And you can see in the different type of shape and all sort of results indicative of the shape of a specific dose response for specific endpoint are reported. So it's really that's what the scientific the science is trying to well, we have to look at the science, but we also have to as ICRP members to try to digest all this data, and we can't just make changes which would obviously have a very important effect. So that's just an example I wanted to touch on.
Christoph, I'm sharing your slides. Just let me know when you want the next one.
So next one. Okay, so what's needed next? I think I've got an extra 3 slides. I'm a bit lost now, but I should be fine. So ICRP strongly benefit from the full range of multidisciplinary scientific results on radiation protection. And as touched on a bit earlier, a new recommendation need to consider all the ethical and societal aspect, the experience, as well as the fundamental goal and principle, and the available concept and tool. But above all, I think the recommendation need to be easily understandable outside ICRP by practicing radiation protection professional who won't necessarily be scientists, but the reasoning should be clear to scientists. Next one. So here my conclusion and summary of what I was presenting you. So the role of the scientist remains central to everything ICRP does, and scientific results must be the basis for the radiation protection system. But the evidence must be clear, and I wanted to give you this example of the LNT model to justify any change in the system. And the system must exist despite the uncertainty. We know there's sometimes uncertainties we can't we have to deal with. We don't know everything. Example would be transfer from animal data to human evidence, shape of the dose response for cancer. So a pragmatic approach is essential. And in the end, ICRP must develop recommendation. The society expects us to do so, even if the scientific evidence is weak. So we do need to continue to work together as a community. And I think if you press again, just once, yes. So message here would be, please do engage with ICRP on the various activities mentioned to ensure the review of the system and any new proposal have a strong scientific basis. And my last slide would just be to thank you so much for listening. And I also would like to thank Simon Buffler and Werner Röhm, with who I exchanged while preparing this slide. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Christoph. And next one on to speak is the regulatory perspective, Marina Di Giorgio, who has a background in biological sciences from the University of Buenos Aires. She has a postgraduate degree in radiological protection, nuclear safety, and biological chemistry. She joined the Argentina Nuclear Regulatory Authority in 1997, and she's first vice president of its board of directors at present. She's also the president of the Argentina Radiation Protection Society and lead coordinator of the Latin American Biological Dosimetry Network. So, Martina, you are fine to go.
Thank you, Michael, for your presentation. I would like to thank the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority for the invitation, and also the ICRP organizers. I am here representing the FORO. The FORO is the Ibero-American Forum of Radiological and Nuclear Regulatory Bodies, and is an association created in 1997 with the aim of promoting radiological, nuclear, and physical safety at the highest level in the Ibero-American region. Currently, the forum is composed by the radiological and nuclear regulatory bodies of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Cuba, Spain, Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, Portugal, and Uruguay, and intends to incorporate new members as the consolidation of its organizational and institutional structure is achieved. The forum has created an environment for the exchange of experiences and the realization of joint activities related to common problems in the region. And one of the instruments aimed at achieving this objective is the joint development of technical program work. So with this brief introduction of the forum, I would like to make my presentation. So, in the first slide, I would like to show how are the recommendations of ICRP apply when regulating radiation protection. As it is mentioned before, since its foundation in 1928, the ICRP has regularly published its general recommendations aimed at protecting people and the environment from detrimental effects of exposure to ionizing radiation without unduly limiting its benefits. So protection of people is based on two safety goals: keeping doses to organs and tissues below thresholds to avoid harmful tissue reactions, that is the deterministic effects, and also the management of effective dose to limit the probability of occurrence of stochastic effects. Since the first documents, the Commission has been reviewing the recommendations to adapt them to scientific advances and the lesson learned from their application. The doctrine that was established by the ICRP in its general recommendations serves as a basis for international organizations to establish the regulations that each country subsequently incorporates into the regulatory system. In addition to the general recommendations, the Commission also regularly published specific recommendations that are applicable to specific areas such as the medical interventionism, norm industries, etc., etc. So regulators, and certainly the FORO, rely on these specific recommendations when we are setting the criteria in the technical assessment, in the development of guidelines, or to inspire other regulatory actions, such as the inspections and other regulations. What does the authorities need and what are the priorities? In fact, there is a need to provide a clear evidence which demonstrates how any changes to the radiation protection system would lead to proportionate overall improvement to delivery of radiation safety, human health, and environmental protection. So we consider that the system needs to be adaptable to future changes. For example, new advances in technologies, large accidents, wide-scale decommissioning, the societal changes also, the climate changes should be taken into account, ensuring that the radiation protection system can be applicable in practice. So the theory and the practice to become together. Despite the fact that the radiation protection system is well consolidated from the different elements that make up the international community dedicated to radiation protection, it has been warned for some time that the radiation protection system is complex, being in fact essential to know very deeply the philosophy that underpins the recommendations of the Commission so as not to err in their interpretation and in the requirement regarding compliance. This is not available to each and every one of the professionals who dedicate their professional activity to this field, but even less at this time, the current time, in which many of the parents of the system are not longer active. So, what does, in this sense, there are some activities that were performed on, and I would like to highlight the NEA from OECD that has been organized in the International Radiation Protection School at the Stockholm University since 2018, so that the parents of the International Radiation Protection System can explain to the following generations, to the new generations, the philosophy and the origin of the different principles and recommendations of the ICRP. Perhaps that expand the possibilities and the options through which their knowledge can be extended, that it would be a necessity of the regulatory authorities. The general perception of radiological risk has been meant that the entire radiation protection system is most likely oversized compared to the risk associated with other industries that are assumed with less concern. So, from the point of view of regulators, there are two key aspects that need special attention. One is the review and revision of the detriment concept. The impact of a stochastic effect is reflected by the radiation detriment, which is based on the sum of lifetime risk from several cancers, weighted by the severity of these cancers, and integrates the possibility of heritable effects. The detriment concept was elaborated in ICRP publication 60 in 1991 and needs to be revised and updated to reflect evolution of scientific knowledge of risk and expert judgment concerning lethality, quality of life, and years of life lost. And it is necessary the explicit recognition of differences in detriment with age at exposure and between males and females that could improve the clarity of the application of the system, showing in particular that the risk to young children are greater than risk to adults. The other point is the review and revision of the current system of quantities and units to suggest the necessary revisions to update it by taking into account a number of lessons learned, particularly in the aftermath of nuclear accidents and in the protection of patients in practices of radiodiagnosis, interventional radiology, and radiotherapy. We know that the number of difficulties found included that the differences between the quantities, that is effective dose, equivalent dose, and absorbed dose, are not well explained and are not well understood, even by educated audiences. The distinction between the quantities used in radiological protection system, equivalent dose and effective dose, and the operational quantities used for radiation measurements, the dose equivalent quantities, personal dose equivalent, is even more difficult to understand. So the use of the same unit, sievert, for the quantities equivalent dose of an organ and effective dose over the body without specifying the quantity, and for the operational quantity dose equivalent, enhances confusion and misunderstanding. So there are many areas that are identified for potential reviewing, including what we know as classification of effects with particular focus on tissue reactions, reformulation of detriment, potentially including non-cancer diseases, re-evaluating of the relationship between detriment and effective dose, and the possibility of defining detriments for males and females of different ages, individual variation in the response to radiation exposure, that is radiosensibility and radiosusceptibility, hereditary effects, effects and risk in non-human biota and ecosystem, bringing together protection of people and the environment. So incremental improvements also to the fundamental principles of justification and optimization, a broader approach to protection of individuals, clarification of the exposure situation, explicit incorporation of ethical basis of the system, and also reflect the importance of communication and stakeholder involvement. So, and another important point is the further advice on education and training. So the main important international research platforms in radiation protections have defined the priorities in each of the sectors and have identified different challenges that will have to be faced in the coming years. So it is intended that the radiation protection system can benefit from incorporating all the possibilities offered by the scientific and technological advances currently available, such as artificial intelligence, simulation, etc. So these innovative approaches often encounter considerable resistance among regulators. And an example of this is the dosimetric monitoring of workers using the Monte Carlo simulations, that models and software are available, but not generally accepted as an official method. So this type of resistance is what should be tried to be loosened through an adequate knowledge of the fundamentals of the radiation protection system. Additionally, other priorities in the definition of radiation protection strategies are the incorporation of disciplines such as bioethics, sociology, and communication sciences, and the development of specific recommendations for new therapies and medical technologies, and also veterinary applications, protection of biota and ecosystem. Natural sources is another important point. So my conclusion by the name of the forum is that the forum basis is projects on a scale scientific basis, ICRP recommendations, and IA standards and guidelines. The forum identifies three main areas that need future developments. As I mentioned before, radiation risk assessment, dosimetry, and application implementation of the system of radiological protections. And as it was well established in previous conversations and in the previous presentations, ICRP provides evidence-based conclusions on the effects of ionized radiation. ICRP uses this finding to issue or modify its recommendations, and the IIA, as well as other standard bodies, define the rules to ensure compliance with the recommendation of the ICRP. So that is, ICRP would justify the why, ICRP would mark the what, and IIA and the European community would define the how. We believe that the role played by each of its agencies is perfectly recognized and well established. So many thanks.
Thank you very much, Marina. let's look at the third perspective now, and that's the industry perspective, which will be given to us by Sami Melhem. He has a background in nuclear energy and nuclear plant design from the Paris Sud University, the same as Christophe, I note. He has served at the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission between 2013 and 2019, and after that at the CERN nuclear research facility in Switzerland, and also at the IAEA. Since November 2022, he is Radiological Protection Program Lead at the World Nuclear Association and is responsible for coordination committees that convene under the WNA. So please, Sami, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for a nice introduction. On behalf of World Nuclear Association, I would like to thank you, the organizer, the ICRP Commission, and the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority to give us an opportunity to represent the views and also the experience from the RP, from the radiation protection practitioners, especially for this topic regarding the current radiological protection system and how to move forward in the future for the current RP system. Here's this is the outline of my presentation. First, I would like to give a short overview of the World Nuclear Association and its working groups, in particular the Radiological Protection Working Group, which I am the staff director for this group. Then I will present the nuclear industry performance records, and then I will share some thoughts and views from the radiation protection practitioners regarding the current radiation protection system. Then I will explain how to move forwards and what we expect for the future radiological protection system from the radiation protection point of view, from the practitioners and the nuclear industry. Then how to inform also the next update of the ICRP general recommendations. Then I will close my presentation with some conclusions. World Nuclear Association is a global network of almost 200 members company. It's coming from most countries that uses nuclear technologies. Our mission is to promote the wider understanding of nuclear technologies among key international influencers such as ICRP, IAEA, and other international organizations by producing authoritative information and developing common industry positions and contributing as well to the energy debate. World Nuclear Association is the only industry organization with a global mandate to promote nuclear energy. To promote nuclear energy and achieve the association missions and objectives, we have established several working groups such as fuel cycle working groups, plant performance working groups, and also the radiological protection working group. This group, the radiation protection working group, it's group of radiation protection expert and radiation protection practitioners from different members companies. It's a channel the global nuclear industry voice of radiation protection questions and issues, and also share the knowledge of and ideas around and maintaining the radiation safety. And we influence the development of a balanced radiation protection framework and the standards by ensuring working group perspective are relied and understood and discussed. We work on the revision of the next ICRP general recommendations and preparing for the upcoming generational change and improve education in the field of radiation protection. Here's in this slide, I would like to present that the nuclear industry has for many years and impressive records for controlling and reducing exposure due to the application of optimization principle. As you can see from the first figure, that the collective dose over many years have significantly dropped due to the application of optimization principles for different regions, for different types of reactors. In the second figure, we see that the dose for the workers who works at a nuclear power plant for different types of reactors, for pressurized water reactor, boiling one, and heavy water reactor and gas-cooled reactors, has also significantly dropped over the years. We see that the dose for the workers is now like the average dose is becoming much below 1 millisievert, which is like comparable to the natural background radiations and within the variability of the natural background. These figures is coming from UNSCARE, the latest UNSCARE report on occupational exposure, which was published last year. So like keeping in mind this very good, impressive of nuclear industry performance, we see that from perspective of radiation protection practitioners, that radiation protection system is becoming more complex and even difficult to be understood and interpreted. In terms of, for example, like the dose limit, dose constraints, reference levels for different variability of application for different exposure situations, such as emergency, normal, and planned exposure situation is becoming more confusing, like for the public especially, and also to some extent to some radiation protection practitioners. So kind of simplifications in these areas is really well appreciated. It's good to deal with very simple data and very simple term. So this problem with the complexity in the systems leads to problems in the system to become more practical, to be implemented, and even like it's become more conservative. So we see that in the applications of optimizations for the regulatory system are even more conservative. This leads to a tendency from regulators to minimize the dose, which leads also to misinterpretation of the application of optimization principle, not taking into account the other factors of economic and social factors as well. And we know that the radiation hazards at the operational side is one of many hazards. So we should also take into account in the application of optimization process, we should also optimize other risk, not only the radiation risk and the other hazards that exist in the field. So we see that, as I presented, that RB becoming more complex, less practical, more conservative, misinterpreted, and RB-centric, not taking into account the other risks that exist on the site. We see that this implies that there's a significant cost for managing radiations in terms of financial resources, human resources, and also physical one. And there's also this proportionate outcome in terms of wider non-radiological hazards. And also this leads to the current negative perceptions of radiations. For example, the public dose limit is less than the natural background, implies that the man-made radiation is more dangerous than the natural one. So for the public, this creates kind of fear of radiation phobia. And also there's a lot of attention on very low dose exposure leads to unnecessary constraints on operations, new projects, and also on waste management. World Nuclear Association accept the LNT-based approach as the best current simple approach to describe and to develop the future RB systems, but we should take into account that not all the radiations are linear. There is a lot of uncertainties in the area of low dose, and we know that some of the radiation behaves like non-linear and some of them linear, some of them show some kind of a threshold. So this should be considered, okay, while accepting the LNT model. And we should know that this could promote idea that all radiation is harmful. We should be careful, like while adopting the LNT model, that this model is tell us that if there is a risk, then indeed it's very small and within the range of the risk of usually accepted in the society. So application of a graded approach in the area of low dose is a must, especially in the decision-making at the low dose area. So here's like some suggestions how to move forward in the radiation protection system in terms of proportionality and adopting a holistic approach. First, the decision-making at low dose must be more understandable and relevant to the general public, a proportionality with very low risk involved, and removing undue to conservatism, accepting that the radiation is just one of many potential hazards that must be considered. We should also reinforce the optimization as not as minimization and optimize of the allocation of resources to reflect the level of risk, and also to take into account that the radiation is one of number of hazards that must be managed. Current hazard regulatory guidance are not well harmonized, so there is a need to harmonize the regulatory guidance. We see that one of the main challenge of the applications of all hazard approach, that there is a lack of the required technical expertise to provide recommendations in the fields of all hazard approach. So one of the solutions that could be suggested, that all hazard approach should be addressed as a top-tier statement in the high-level publications for the ICRP and the IAA, so that the authorities and interested stakeholders should ensure that they have the required experts to provide the guidance and to implement such approach. Also, to move forward in the RP systems in terms of effective communications and public understanding, first of all, observation and experience of practitioners should be collected and communicated with the regulators and operators. Also, the need for simplification of the RP system is well appreciated as well, and we should improve communications of radiation risk to the public and wider stakeholders to allow them to make informed decisions on what's safe. We know that, okay, the public are not aware of the natural background radiations, that is like, it's 2.5 millisievert in terms of 3 to like 4 order of magnitudes higher than the dose it's coming from a nuclear industry. The nuclear industry dose, it's like very few fractions for the public dose. We know that public, they are not aware of this fact. They are not aware of the natural background radiation. So there is a need, and it's really important, of communicating of the public on the radiations and risk. Use the context of the natural background radiation. How do we see how we could inform the next update of the ICRP general recommendations? Here I present a list of the ICRP task groups and the areas of focus from the nuclear industry perspective. We see that we should focus on the task group related to the radiation risk inference at low dose, the task group related to the radiation protection of the environment, the task group related to the optimization in the system of radiological protection and the application of a principle of justifications, the task group related to the ecosystem services, complexity and understandability of the radiation protection system. Also that the new task group on the individualization and in the RP systems. And also there's upcoming task groups on communications and educations and training. It's very important. Upcoming task groups that may be initiated in the late next term in 2027 and 2028. So it's really important that the nuclear industry and radiation protection practitioners to be involved and engaged in this process. And unfortunately, we really appreciate the step that was taken by the ICRP Commission to engage the nuclear industry and to engage the radiation protection practitioners in this process. But unfortunately, as you can see here, like in the figure, that the nuclear industry practitioners is now still less than 1% of the ICRP community and the ICRP committees or ICRP task groups. We would like to encourage ICRP to have like a greater representation from nuclear industry practitioners to represent the views from the nuclear industry as well, to be well reflected in the upcoming radiation protection system. Here's the conclusion of my presentations. As I presented, that the nuclear industry has very good records in controlling and reducing occupational and public exposure to ionizing radiations. We should give greater emphasis to the natural background exposure and its variability, both in general decision making and in the public communication. The nuclear industry recommends to take into account all hazard approach in the future system of protection. Also recommends implementing a more realistic graded approach, especially in the area of low dose. World Nuclear Association will participate actively in the revision of the ICRP general recommendations as the international voice of the nuclear industry, providing the perspective of radiological protection working group members. We have recently published position statement on managing low-dose radiation exposures. We reflected all of the key messages that I have presented here in terms of the need for simplification of the RP systems and effective communications and adopting all hazard approach and ensuring sustainability and public understanding. It's now this publication published last year and it's available on World Nuclear Association website. Just like I would like to thank you for listening, and also I would like to take this opportunity to inform you about the upcoming joint WNA and ICRB workshop that will take place in Bristol in United Kingdom on 27 and 28 September. In this workshop, we will address the themes of holistic optimizations, applications of all hazard approach in the optimization process, showing a practical example how to apply and how to adapt such approach. And also we're gonna give kind of good practices, good examples for effective communications with the publics and other stakeholders for the system of radiological protection. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sami, for this presentation of the industrial perspective. This would be the end then of our presentation of stakeholder perspectives, and we have arrived at our final item, and a very important one, panel discussion, which will be moderated by Carl-Magnus Larsson. So I give the word to you, Carl-Magnus.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you all presenters, and I hope that you can hear me. And we are now coming into the moderated discussions, but as I said from the beginning, and as it was indicated, I will, to begin with, introduce two panelists that have not been given presentations, and that is Anna Clark. Anna Clark is the head of the Waste and Environmental Safety section in the IAEA's Department of Nuclear Safety and Security, where she leads the IAEA's programs for the safety of radioactive waste management, decommissioning, remediation, and environmental protection. And prior to joining the IAEA, she also held a role as a chief strategist and head of decommissioning and remediation for the UK Nuclear Decommissioning Agency. So very welcome, Anna, and I will leave it to you now and to give your perspective, and then I will get back and I will introduce our next panelist who didn't have the opportunity to speak before, with Werner Riem, but we can start with you, Anna. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to provide the perspective of IAEA. I'll try and cover fairly quickly 3 points that I hope are important for looking at the role of ICRP going forward. So we have, firstly, just talk about the important relationship between ICRP and IAEA, the difference between theory and practice, and also a thought about other organizations that have a role in ensuring the successful implementation of the radiation protection system. So firstly, the relationship between ICRP and IAEA. Carl-Magnus has already explained very clearly the flow from science to safety standards. So starting with the science and bodies like UNSCEAR, looking at the effects of the exposure to ionizing radiation, from where ICRP digests that science and develops recommendations on the system of radiation protection. And from there, those recommendations are considered during the development of the standards for radiation safety published by IAEA, which is really putting all of those, that science and the principles into practice. And the point I really want to make is that flow works because of collaboration. The ICRP and IAEA liaise closely already on needs and lessons learned. But with the growth in the number of organizations engaged in radiation protection that Carl Magnus shared with us, collaboration is more important than ever. I think that by acknowledging the roles that we each play and continuing that important collaboration, we're more efficient, so we avoid duplication, and we're more effective. So we're building on the expertise that each organization has, and therefore hopefully building consistent messages and importantly avoiding the potential for contradiction. So that's my first point: collaboration more important than ever. Secondly, I think this has been covered a bit already, and I want to reiterate the importance between theory and practice. So as I said, the IAEA develops the safety standards or publishes the safety standards, but they're actually established by its member states, so through a consensus-based approach. So they reflect an international consensus on what constitutes a high level of nuclear safety and radiation safety. And they serve as a global reference for protecting people and the environment. They're not binding on member states, but they may be and often are adopted by them. And they're also binding on member states if they're assisted by the IAEA. And so as a consequence, the IAEA has access to a huge amount of experience from implementing the principles of radiation protection. So that's a broad experience and a deep experience that we have from the wide variety of member states. So when the IAEA reviews compliance against these safety standards, invariably we kind of open a window onto the challenges faced by member states when they're implementing the system of radiation protection. And that's challenges faced by countries with a mature regulatory framework and also countries who are trying to introduce a system of radiation protection into their regulations. So with that in mind, given that there are countries that are still developing their regulatory framework, we have to be really careful about introducing complexities and introducing conservatisms, because that can really delay any implementation. It can delay adoption of a fit for purpose radiation protection system and therefore delay implementation. And similarly, delays, as Marina pointed out, changes can come, changes that we introduce have to be we have to be confident that they're going to lead to a positive improvements on the ground, because again, changes can lead to delays in the adoption of the radiation protection system. So experience of implementation, we can't change the science, clearly, but it's vital that that practice is fed into the articulation of the RP system and associated recommendations. And the third point I wanted to make is about missing stakeholders, question mark. So I think something that ICRP and IAEA has in common is that we are both focused on ionizing radiation and radiation protection, but we are increasingly aware of the importance of non-radioactive hazards, and Sameh mentioned the all hazards approach, and also the influence of non-safety aspects, which is evidenced in our definition of the optimization of protection and safety that we share, which is the process of determining the level of protection and safety that makes exposures as low as reasonably achievable, with economic and social factors being taken into account. And in fact, IAEA takes it further, in GSR Part 3, General Safety Requirements Part 3, requires consideration also of environmental factors. So then we've got all three pillars of sustainability that are covered. So I say again, ICRP and IAEA are focused on radiation safety, as are many of the organizations represented today. So how do we incorporate the expert knowledge from these other fields of expertise, from social science, from the non radiation risks, communication experts, engagement experts. I think it's very tempting for us to think we know it and we can cover it, but actually I think it would be wise for us to start inviting some of those other experts to the table. So how do we engage with those bodies when there's already so many organizations working together? So those are the 3 points I wanted to make just by way of introduction, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Anna. And we will now turn to Werner Riem. Werner Riem is head of the staff unit of the future of radiation protection, which is very relevant, of course, to the topic we are talking about here at the Federal Office for Radiation Protection in Germany. And in addition, he is also professor at the medical faculty of the University of Munich. And he has been involved with ICRP since 2005. And importantly, of course, he is the current chair of the ICRP since 2021. So we are very pleased that you are able to join us for this webinar, Werner. And please take a few minutes and give us your thoughts in relation to the subject of this webinar. Over to you, Werner.
Well, thank you very much, Carl Magnus. And thank you all for joining this webinar and contributing to this webinar, and also thank all who are listening now to this webinar. Now, Anna, I think you already made a point which I can follow up now. You mentioned that there are many international organizations, and indeed, if we look at the ICRP website, we have a list of organizations with which or with whom ICRP has formal relations, and if you count them, I mean, that's 30 or even more. So of course, UNSCARE, we heard about the role of UNSCARE, we heard about the role of the agency, the IAEA. We have IRPA, the International Radiation Protection Association, as a major player, and many more. WHO, for example, the World Health Organization, and many more who are interested in radiation protection. And you made another important point that collaboration is more important than ever. And I fully agree, or we fully agree in ICRP, and that's why we have those relations with many other organizations. So it's really a complicated world, as Carl Magnus already pointed out in his introduction. And we, from the ICRP, we have the desire to involve anyone who is interested in RP. So anyone is welcome, everyone is welcome, and that's why we keep contact with all the organizations, and the more the better, I would say, even because, as you say, collaboration is more important, even more important than ever. Now, the topic of this webinar, to think about the role of ICRP in this complex ecosystem of many other international organizations, is an important one. And it became already clear when we looked or listened to the feedback we got from the digital workshop on the future of RP, mentioned by Carl Magnus already. This digital workshop, which was due to the pandemics, we had to do it digitally. And we summarized the feedback we got because we asked the whole community all over the world, what do you think about the process now to initiate the review of the system? And one topic which came quite often, interestingly, was the interaction of ICRP with other international organizations, scientific institutions, regulators, practitioners, and so on. So this is this is why I'm so thankful that SSM took this up and organized together with us this workshop, because indeed our relationship to the rest of the world interested in RP is really important. Now, when you listen closer to what has been said at that workshop, for example, it was stressed that there's a need for international efforts to enhance education and training. We heard that already several times today, and Actually, I just want to highlight the recent initiative of ICRP on the Vancouver Call for Action to strengthen expertise in radiological protection worldwide. In a way, it's an outcome of the digital workshop, because we understood that this is so important for many of the organizations which are interested in our work. Or another topic which was mentioned several times, the interaction between the ICRP and other organizations and the radiological community, the stakeholders. And you may know that ICRP is regularly organizing a meeting with these organizations every year. The next SLO, as we call them, Special Liaison Organizations, will take place in Bristol. Sami already mentioned the workshop organized by WNA, and in conjunction with the workshop, ICRP will organize their annual meeting with the international organizations. Because, as Anna said, collaboration is so important. Another topic which was mentioned during the digital workshop was that openness, accessibility, and transparency is crucial. All are crucial to the success of the review and revision. And we try, at least as good as we can as ICRP, for example, to organize webinars like the one today, where everyone can join, or workshops or symposia. Carl Magnus mentioned the next scientific symposium in Tokyo, in Japan, in November this year. We publish our results. Our task groups are supposed to publish whenever they have a new result. They should not wait until the final report is being produced, but they can or should or are encouraged to publish even beforehand, that the community understands what we are currently doing as ICRP. We have the public consultation of the draft reports, where everyone can contribute and comment, and we try to improve based on the feedback of our stakeholders. So transparency is something which is really, really important, and we do our best to be transparent. Or another topic which was mentioned during this workshop was that ICRP should ensure its independence. And this is one topic I would like to stress again. It was already mentioned earlier today, that ICRP, I think Christoph mentioned that, ICRP consists of volunteer members. All of us, we are working on a volunteer basis. We do not represent our country. We do not represent our employer, our organization. We are working because of our expertise, because we were asked to contribute to ICRP. And this makes the role of ICRP a bit specific. ANSCIA is different, as you know. The IAEA is different, as you know. ERPA is also different. So the role of ICRP is a specific one, and this is one example. We are really independent, and we are just individuals. I mean, we are not organizations, many. So we are just individuals, and we work to digest, as Anna said, the work from ANSCIA, try to develop our recommendations, and then pass it on, for example, to regulators, to the agency. And so in this framework, in this complex framework, and I'm almost done, in this complex framework of many international organizations, I think ICRP has a specific role. And this should always be kept in mind when we now discuss how ICRP should behave, or what ICRP should do, and with whom we should collaborate. So this is something which makes us as ICRP unique. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Werner, and thank you both Anna and Werner for your contributions here. And now we have a moderated discussion, and we have received a number of questions through the question and answer function. And if there are more questions that you would want to ask, then please add them to the question and answer function. and we will deal with them as we can. And we got a little bit of time for this moderated discussion before we will wrap it up. So we still have time to receive questions. Now, there is a question from already that I think has strong relationship with what you were talking about, Werner, and that is a question that has been entered, and how ICRP can help junior radiation physicists in Europe or outside Europe to get a job and help them to cooperate with ICRP in the future. I think that there are some initiatives there, Werner, that you can talk about and perhaps elaborate.
Yes, thank you. Good point. We noted already that, of course, we should support young scientists to join our field. This is crucial for the future, not for my future, but for the future of the next 20, 30, 40 years. And so as a rather small organization, we cannot do so much, but we found a way how we think we can support this process, and this is the Mentee program. A couple of years ago, we have initiated a Mentee program, and in this program, we want to engage students, young scientists, young professionals, wherever they might come from, to join ICRP task groups. And so everyone who is interested in joining a task group can apply, and we will consider certain tasks or role for any individual mentee. And any individual mentee will also have a senior member of that task group as a mentor. Now, there will be open calls. Whenever we will have a new task group, we will also announce that we are interested in mentees. And then you may apply if you feel that you can contribute, and then we will select those who can contribute to the task group. And in this way, you as a young researcher, have an easy opportunity to become an ICRP member. And we have already examples where a mentee became a full member of a task group. And so this continues, and in that way, young people can learn how ICRP is working, how we are thinking. And yes, everyone is encouraged to apply. Please visit the website. You will find the open calls.
Thank you very much. And I will go on to a question where maybe several of the panel members would like to comment. And this is a specific question really about how do the members of the forum think that the reevaluation of the relationship between detriment and effective dose by defining age and sex-dependent tissue weighting factors will decrease the complexity of the system? I would like to reformulate that question with I hope that you don't mind. And there is the contradiction here between requests for simplification of the system, and at the same time a request for the reliance on the most up-to-date and solid science. That may not be that easy to reconcile, and maybe I could ask Christoph first, since you gave a presentation on the scientific basis here, to comment on how you see that ICRP should incorporate science in a proper way in order to actually promote the system for radiological protection and make it useful for stakeholders. Complex question, Christoph, but I'm sure you're up to it.
Well, that's I'm still really young in ICRP, joining as a member 2 years ago. And this is a question. I'm not sure. I need a bit of time to think about it. I would not only be able to provide maybe my view. I think it's not so easy to keep things simple, and then how to translate sometimes quite complicated when you go to mechanistic studies and you're using specific model, either in vitro or in vivo, and then you want to analyze this data, interpret this data, also value the quality of the results, and how it's reproducible. It's a big task by itself, and then how then it translates into radiation protection standard. That's obviously complicated. And we said we always a need to screen the literature to validate this data, check the robustness of the data, and it's complicated task, and it takes a lot of time as well. So probably not answer the question, but from the scientific point of view, that's I think what I would like to say. What I think I can say.
Well, thank you, Christoph. I would like to turn to Same actually with the same question, because I think that it was mentioned in your presentation that there is a need for the simplification and for making it possible for the practitioners to actually make use of the system. And at the same time, I suppose that you, just like anyone else, would be interested in the scientific basis of the system. But how would you like to see it from the, let's say, the user or implemented perspective?
I would just like have a comment. It's important, like, for the radiological protection system to be represented as simple as possible, but like at least if it's not simple, not like applying simple data, at least not to be like confused among the practitioners and themselves. We see that many terms, like, as I mentioned, like for the dose limits, reference levels, and also like for different exposure situation is confusing for some practitioners in the field of radiation protections from themselves. Like, it's not only like for the public, it's difficult for them to understand, but also for the radiation experts themselves. So it's really important, like, to avoid such confusion, okay, among the radiation practitioners. If we cannot like make it as simple as possible, okay, it's better not like to have kind of confusion. We should like avoid such situations.
Does anyone else in the panel want to make a comment in relation to this? I can see Werner.
Yes, if I may. I mean, this is really a good question. So we have to balance the scientific evidence against the practicability. I always used to say that we, as in radiation protection, we are experts in balancing pros and cons, aren't we? So this is just another example. And this topic of individualization, this is a very hot topic now, and we have a task group looking at the science first. And there is quite some need or pressure from the medical field where patients expect some individualization in RP in a way. On the other hand, it's also clear we cannot develop a system where we have individualized dose limits, and it wouldn't be practical. And for this reason, we have just recently, the main commission has established a new task group, and this is the last one: individualization and stratification in RP, implications in the areas of application. So this task group is supposed to think about consequences, and they do not just speak of individualization, but also stratification, meaning that we combine groups, let's say males and females. This is not individualization, but in our language, stratification. And so we have to think about the consequences, so a kind of impact assessment. And for such kind of considerations, we really need our stakeholders, the organizations like WNA, like the agency, like others, who in the end have to apply or work or live with the system. So I also used to say that if we develop an ideal new system, which is perfectly in line with science, but if then the system cannot be applied because it's no more practicable, then we did a bad job. So we have to find a balance here.
Anyone else who want to make a comment here? Anna, for instance, in relation to, you know, translating the science into and the recommendations into guidance.
Well, yes, I was going to raise my hand to comment, but then Werner has pretty much said what I wanted to say, in that, you know, if we can see there are changes in the science or changes in our understanding of the effects of ionizing radiation, then clearly as a community we need to look at it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there are additional complexities required, or indeed that the system of radiation protection needs to change at all. And I completely agree with Werner's point that we need to understand the consequence of our improved understanding of the science, and determine whether or not that means changes are actually going to deliver any benefit. And I think simplicity, I think it is something to strive for. Certainly from the IAEA's perspective, we need our safety standards to be applicable in so many different member states with so many different levels of maturity of their regulatory framework, variety of different issues. So if we have simplicity, it means that we can actually make sure that the system is applied in an appropriate way. So yeah, I agree. Balancing the science and the applicability. Really agree with that statement.
Marina, I would like to invite you to comment in relation to this question as well, the complexity versus the simplicity, complexity of science and simplicity in application of the science. Do you have any thoughts in relation to that?
Yes, well, I think it's a very good question, and the answer is not simple. But I agree with the situation of balance. I think that is a detrimental concept. The detriment concept should be improved, because mainly in the clinical applications. And I think that the generalism in these aspects, in the risk projection, is not good for an average, concept of average. So I think that it is important. I mentioned the complexity. I assume the complexity, but I think that for specific areas, it's important to have a distinction and accuracy, mainly in particular for the risk of young children and adolescents, taking into account that they are in greater risk than adults. So I have not a correct answer for the question, but I think that in special, particular situations, in medical application, it's important to have this distinction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we do have a question a little bit further down the list here that I think that we can come back to in relation to talking about science. And it was mentioned also by presenters that, and this is in particular in relation to the nuclear accident in Japan after the tsunami. Radiological protection is also the issue of human rights and social justice. And there is the UN Human Rights Council, but there is also the need for better understanding of social sciences, let's say, and the broader aspects about health protection. And this can be viewed on differently from within the ICRP and from the different users. And it would be interesting to hear some views on the role of, let's say, social science and the broader perspective of health protection, how that could be implemented in the recommendations of the ICRP. And I'll put you on the spot here, Same, and I'll start with you, and then I will go to the other panelists as well. Obviously, for the industry, the well-being, through consultation, you will be familiar with the well-being of people ranging far outside the pure health perspective. And how do you think that these things should be elements should be included in the ICRP recommendations?
Sorry, could you the question for me is not clear. Could you just
So
repeat it?
how do you consider that? I mean, the science behind the ICRP system is really health-based or environmental impact-based, but human well-being has many more dimensions than that, and I'm sure that you, from the industry perspective, have been confronted with that numerous times through your consultation activities. How do you think it should be integrated in the system, if at all?
Yes, I see. Okay. Actually, I really appreciate the work of the ICRP that it's going on. But it's very important that all of this work, regarding the health impact and radiation and how it's implemented in the recommendation, it should be well communicated with the public, and that's why for the upcoming groups on the ICRP, that group communications of radiation risk is really important, and especially from to talk about in the context of the natural backgrounds, and this aligned with over a risk in the nuclear industry as well.
Werner, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah. I mean, you are right. If we think, for example, about the detriment, how it is calculated, then we have clearly it's the induction of cancer, and there is a bit hereditary diseases are included, leukemia, but that's it for now. Now, if we think about the definition of WHO with the well-being and health, this goes beyond. And one of the topics our new task group on detriment calculation is supposed to think about is whether we should go beyond detriment. And there are other metrics which are a bit broader, used by WHO, for example, the DALI, the disability adjusted life years. One could think about it, whether we should go for such a metrics. And this would allow us to go a bit to think in a broader sense about the consequences of exposures. So there are those ideas now on the table. I cannot tell you what the outcome will be. Maybe in 3 years from now, we will have a webinar of the task group on that topic, and then we get a clearer idea. But I think it's worth thinking about it, because as I mentioned, WHO is using that. And we are in close contact with WHO. So it's worthwhile thinking or looking what they are doing.
Are there any particular stakeholders, since this is actually the role of ICRP and stakeholders, are there particular stakeholders? Is there a need for broadening the spectrum of stakeholders in order to meaningfully address these very broad questions about well-being? Would someone, yeah, Anna?
Yeah, thank you. This was kind of the point behind my third point when I was given the floor as part of the introduction. I think we are all becoming increasingly aware of the importance of aspects other than radiation protection and radiation safety, the other aspects of well-being, consideration of society, of economy, other environmental impacts, and so on. And I think it's very tempting for us to try and write guidance on how to take account of all of these other factors. But I also recognize that in the same way as that we are all thinking very deeply about radiation safety, there are other organizations out there who are thinking very deeply about other health effects, about there'll be a world of social scientists, there's a world of experts on how to engage interested parties and so on. And I And I do think that there is room for us to reach out and try and incorporate some of that expertise into our thinking, because otherwise
Is she frozen
At
now?
least I lost Anna now.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we lost her.
All right,
But
we will
maybe I
come
can
back.
just add, maybe I
Yes.
can just add that ICRP is in one of the organizations where we have close contact is the Social Science and Humanities platform, research platform in Europe, SSH. So we are aware of this. Of course, ICRP has always been aware of that communication, stakeholder involvement, and many other aspects are important. And if you think about the publication 138 on the ethical basis of the system, so clearly in recent times, ICRP thinks in a broader way about radiation protection already, but we should continue and follow this path. We have to, because this is typical for many other areas as well. And we in radiation protection, we must not miss this issue.
There is a specific question here about collaboration with other organizations, and that is with non-governmental organizations. And the question is addressed to me. Where is the place of non-governmental organizations? Can they collaborate directly with ICRPs? So I don't really have the answer to how that mechanism is put in place. So maybe I put you on the spot, Werner, and ask you to respond to the really how the rules for the formal liaison.
What I can say on the spot is that we are going to listen to anyone. So anyone who is interested in RP and has good ideas, bright ideas, just let us know. I mean, whether there is a specific formal requirement for organizations, I don't think so. So in principle, I mean, they must show that they are interested in RP, but it's a rather informal way to become a liaison organization with ICRP. But
so that is
in any case, we will listen.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And maybe if the Secretariat is online here, maybe the Secretariat can clarify that. But I think that it's open for contact for just about anyone, and then we will take it from there. Now, a number of the questions that have been submitted here, they relate really to the proportionality of the recommendations of ICRP and whether it's more stringent, more restrictive than when we deal with other environmental hazards. I think that one can probably talk a lot about that, and one can also probably include that in a discussion about what stakeholders need to be involved. But I would really like to hear from the panelists, why is there a perception, and what is it based on, that the ICRP recommendations are more restrictive than those recommendations or those values that are used in other areas? It doesn't seem necessarily so when we talk about carcinogenic agents. But really starting with you, Same, can you elaborate on the views about proportionality or disproportionality in the treatment of ionizing radiation versus any other environmental contaminant or agent?
Yes, just like I would like to mention that, okay, it's not about like the optimization principles or the recommendation is written about the ICRP. It's about the applications, okay, and how the regulator is views about these recommendations. For example, as I mentioned, for the optimization principles, there is a very huge tendency from the regulators to minimize the dose and forget about what's written in the application of optimization principle, that you should take into account the social impacts, that you should take into account the economic impacts. So it's not interpreted very well in the regulator point of view, and this leads to allocate a lot of financials and humans and physical resources in the application of optimization principle, for example. So there is a need now to take into account also other hazards and the needs to proper implementations of optimization principles, and take into account also other hazards, and to take into account the graded approach and proportionality in the decision makings in the area of the low dose. For example, for all hazard approach, okay, we have very well guidance regarding other hazards, for chemical hazards and for natural hazards and for industrial mechanical hazards, but they are not integrated together. It's not harmonized together. Okay, we see only implementations of the application of optimization principle, and optimizing the risk is related only, it's focused in the it's RP centric in the nuclear industry. So it's really important now, for the future radiation protection system, to mention as a top tier statement that all hazard approach should be taken into account, that the regulator and the national authority, it has a responsibility taking into account all hazards in optimizing the risk. So we know that for the IAEA and for the ICRP Commission, they don't have the required expertise to provide recommendations in such fields, but we rely on that we could have kind of top tier statement in the high level publications that this approach should be well implemented and emphasized. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Werner, I just say that Chris Clement, the scientific secretary, just sent an email here and just saying that, of course, pointing out the obvious, that ICRP is an NGO. So in terms of collaborating with other NGOs, that's already happening. World Nuclear Association is an NGO, but it's an NGO with a different kind of remit than the ICRP. I go to Werner to comment on this question, and then I go to Christoph. I think we have lost. I think we have lost Anna. Hopefully not forever, but Werner, over to you.
I just want to ask a provocative question to Sami. So, is it really the business of ICRP if regulators misinterpret the optimization principle? I mean, also maybe provocative to Marina.
No, sure. No, I'm not saying it's just I'm sharing some views from the radiation protections practitioners that that now the radiation protection system is the current one is it's becoming more conservative, and it's becoming more restricted, and there's a lot of restrictions regarding the nuclear industry. So the need for more simplifications, it's really it's kind of a must now, and the need for adopting all hazard approach, as I mentioned, and effective communications to be well implemented, it's really helpful and useful.
Thank you. Christoph.
Yes. I just wanted to mention, it's not going to make things easier, but I think it's relevant to the comments about other hazard and chemicals and so on. I'm part of the committee for the Nuclear Safety Authority in France. We've been now asked to think about cocktails effect, actually not looking separately to chemical and the risk, but also how there might be synergy between radiation and some chemical release by nuclear power point. So I'm afraid it doesn't make things more simple in that case. And yeah, that's for the scientific part as well. There's a lot to be done, but yeah, we all thinking about it.
Yes, we are indeed. And I had an email from Anna. It seems that the whole internet at the IAEA has somehow, they have problems. So we will see how we go with Anna. She has limited access via the phone. Marina, do you have any comments in relation to, let's say, the proportionality of dealing with radiation in relation to other risks?
Well, yes, there is a controversial situation between specificity that is required in specific areas and the necessity of having some reducing the complexity of the system to be open to all the public and also to the different stakeholders. So it is not easy to have this balance well implemented, but I think that it is important what Sami said about the relation of the oversight of the of the radiation protection system and compare whether associated with other industries that are assumed less concerned. And he compares every time with a natural background. And I think it's important to be conscious of that and to remind the situation of the natural background when we are taking some information or giving some information to other stakeholders that are not well prepared or do not have the knowledge of radiation protection and the science that is behind its regulations. So I think it's a good idea to have in mind the comparison with the background levels, so that it is an easy way to make understandable our regulations.
Thank you. And in relation to the point that was made previously about the national interpretation or the interpretation by regulators and the potential conservatives and the potential maybe risk-averse behavior by regulators, I think this has always been my own comment, and it's not because, having been a regulator for a very long time, I wouldn't subscribe to the idea that regulators don't understand the risks or are generally risk averse. But there are certain circumstances where perhaps poor application distorts the strength of the system as such. And in a risk averse approach, there is a drive to implement the system in its most restrictive way. And I think that if in the future, through the recommendations and more simplified guidance in the recommendations, that can be avoided, I think that everyone would gain from that, including also the regulators. So I have sort of browsed through the questions here and tried to identify the theme, and not surprisingly, and this is what always happens when we talk about the future of the ICRP or the future of radiological protection, is that we zone in on the elements of the system, the risks, the detriment, the various aspects of the system as such, and perhaps not so much about the role of ICRP and what the role of ICRP should be going forward in developing, negotiating, basically selling the system and make it work. together with stakeholders, and what stakeholder, how that process should be shaped. A very broad question, but I'm going to invite all of you to present your view on it. And after that, I'm going to close this discussion because it seems that we are reaching an end to a number of questions that that are coming in. So maybe Christoph first, how do you see ICRP interaction with the broader community in the future?
Well, I think I had a slide trying to show a bit more about what is has been offered recently, and actually asking you know, people to actively participate in providing some ideas, some suggestion for you know, making the radiation protection more perhaps accessible and understandable to everyone, and asking people to join. That was my conclusion, at least for the scientific part. So well, then at this stage, there's perhaps now a need to wait to see who is willing to help, to be involved. It might be a bit optimistic to say that would be a simple thing to do, but at least it's open, and I personally like the idea that it's open, and that's what also we spoke about, transparency, openness, and that's what it is about. So yeah, again, not sure I fully answered the question, but that's my view on it.
Thank you, Christoph. Marina, do you have a point?
Well, yes, I think that the key aspect is the multidisciplinary approach and the cooperation. I think this is important for the new aspects that ICRP is going to go forward. But I would like to emphasize that the flexibility that is mentioned does not imply not to be accurate, not to be more effectively, because safety is our main goal. So I think it's important to say that. Thank you.
Samen?
I just would like to encourage ICRP to continue this transparent process and well-communicated process in the development of the radiation protection systems, and also to emphasize on the to have a greater representations from the radiation protection practitioners and the nuclear industries to their like voluntarily contribute in their ICRP task groups and ICRP committees. Thanks.
Right, and then we go to Werner.
Well, I just listened what the colleague said here, and this is the take-home messages we have for ICRP. No? So I already mentioned how we perceive our role as ICRP in this complicated world of many different organizations, and maybe they're even not enough. Maybe there are more. I saw in the Q&A that there are 2 or 3 others. But ICRP, this is what I always say, ICRP is open. So if there is anyone who is interested in joining ICRP or communicating to ICRP and giving feedback, this is very welcome. I'm pretty sure in the end, once we have a new or a revised product, not everyone will be happy, that's clear. But at least what we can promise is that we will listen to everyone and take every opinion or every consideration really seriously into account. But probably in the end, maybe no one is happy, but we will see.
All right, well, Thank you very much. And all right. So I would like to thank everyone for their contributions, obviously, and I will just do my own little wrap up of I will just have to make it possible for me to view the slide, and I can do that now. So these are the things that you have predicted on the screen now. These are the few things that I have just noted down, but please bear with me. These are just my notes, and you might not agree, and the rest of the team behind this webinar might not agree either, but we will work on it after this webinar, and we will make a short summary of it that will make its way to the ICRP website in due course. Some of the points that I have noted down here on the basis of the contributions and also on the basis of questions is that there is obviously a strong desire among stakeholders to continue the work on the very strong and scientific basis of the ICRP recommendations, both evidence but also prudence in how they are being interpreted. And the point has also been made on broadened the concept of or the notion of science. What is actually science? Is it the environmental and the health science that we traditionally rely on, the epidemiology and so on? But is there also other aspects of science here that needs to be considered in order to build a system that is fit for purpose in the future? Engage with users, and that can be in various ways, directly through the formal arrangements that are in place between ICRP and different organizations. And as Werner pointed out, if anyone has something interesting to contribute, please do so, and contribute it to the ICRP, and ICRP will see what it does with it. But in order to achieve that simplification, that feedback is necessary, and the simplification may also be necessary for the success of the system in the future, because that will improve the uptake and the understanding, and that includes regulators as much as it includes the users, like industry. So complexity versus simplification, seek ways to solving this apparent contradiction. The question we have been discussing here is, of course, is the ICRP system disproportionately restrictive and focusing on too low risks? And one thing that one has to distinguish between is poor recommendations, poor regulations, or poor regulators. Is it that the application of the system distorts the system and make it less fit for purpose than it otherwise could have been? Maintain and strengthen the consultative approach. I think we have been alluding to that quite often, and the importance of ICRP, and in education and training, accepting though that ICRP is a very small organization. It is based on voluntary work, as Werner pointed out, and it's got very limited resources and very limited funding. But trying as much as it can to spread the word and improve the understanding, which is also important, of course, for the future proofing of the system. Acknowledge the role of each organization, and I think it pointed out many times now, collaborate. And I think that could be at least an embryo of some of the points that we can summarize, but we will talk about this later. I apologize for not having been able to go into detail of every question that has been submitted, but I try to group them in themes as well as I have been able to. And let's continue the discussion, and I'm sure the discussion is going to continue for years and years. Personally, I would like to thank all the contributors, but in order to close the meeting, I will hand back to Michael to do the job. So over to you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you very much, Carl Magnus, for that summary. I think you covered a lot of what has been said and of what has been asked. And thank you for the introduction and your well-moderated panelist session. And also thank you to speakers and to the panel. We managed to keep to the time, which is never easy. An occasion like this with people who have a lot to tell, who have a lot of knowledge, but I think you really managed to be very efficient in the way you handled these quite complex questions. From SSM side, we thank the ICRP for this cooperation on organizing this webinar. And we're pleased with the high attendance. I kept a look on the counter. It went up to about 360. So it was well attended. We got also very good questions from the audience. As promised previously and as promised again from Carl Magnus, there will be a summary prepared. I also had colleagues in the room here with me who have been making lots of notes, so I'm sure there will be a good summary prepared, and that this will generate useful input to the ICRP and to all of us. So once again, thank you very much, and I'll now then close this webinar. See you again.